Welcome to the Pitchin and Sippin podcast, where we talk PR trends and tips over sips and meet a wide range of incredible founders, PR pros, and members of the media. I'm Lexie Smith, a former workaholic VP of PR and marketing turned two-time entrepreneur, founder of the PR Bar Inc., business and PR coach, new mama, and self-proclaimed connoisseur of puns, pizza, and wine. I'm a huge believer that knowledge is power and kindness never goes out of style. Think of this show as a way to uplevel your business and career over happy hour. Now let's get to pitchin' and sippin'. Amanda Foley is a PR strategist and consultant with 20 plus years experience. The founder of Curate Your Soul, she sees what makes people magnetic and guides clients to unlock their personal messaging and PR strategy using human design and the gene keys. You guys, I'm really pumped for today's episode. When I first connected with Amanda, I was introduced to an entirely new perspective and way to think through PR and comms. Now, while I'd heard of human design and the gene keys very high level, never in my wildest dreams could I personally think to connect them to the work that I do day in and day out. So that's what I hope to do for you all today. Challenge your mind to think through comms in a new way. So Amanda, welcome to the show. Before we dive into all the professional practice elements, I'd love to start with where is home base and what do you like to do outside of work for fun?
Well, thank you first for having me. I'm a big fan of the show. I am based in Malvern, Pennsylvania, which is just outside of Philadelphia. I have a husband of 20 years, a wonderful husband, and an 11-year-old son that I love spending time with. They're both named George, but we call our son Gio, so they know who I'm yelling at. And the Georges take up a lot of my time, but when I'm not working or with my family, I love to read, I crochet. And now that it's summer, my vegetable garden is in full swing. So that's what keeps me busy.
Okay, reader, what type of books?
Oh, all different types of books. I mean, probably more, I try for more fiction just because I do a lot of like reading and studying, working in the self-development world these days. But what's the last book I loved that I really loved? Well, one that was nonfiction was The Surrender Experiment. That one kept coming into my field and I read it. So if anybody's looking for something really insightful to read, that's also like a really great read, check that one out.
And then I need a fiction because I'm a fiction girl. So what's your
all right. So I'll give you my favorite fiction of late. It's been a little while since I read it, but it's called The Many Daughters of Afong Moy by, is it Jamie Ford? He wrote Hotel in the Corner of Bitter and Sweet, if you've ever heard of that one. Oh, okay. Amazing book. Like I couldn't put it down. And it's really fascinating because it actually loops into some of the methodology behind and the thinking behind human design too. But you don't need to know anything about that to read it. It's really just an amazing read.
And this is where I'm grateful that this show has a transcript. So I feel like that was a long, I'm like, I am not going to remember that entire title.
Yeah, it's a little, and I'll send it to you if you forget. But yes, it's a awesome. great read.
I'm a big reader similarly because so much of my day is spent in the nonfiction world that I do enjoy fiction after hours. It's my
me too.
So. Okay, so let's talk career. I always frame it like this. If you were to give me your Cliff Notes version, talk me through the last 20 years of your career up until today.
It's a long time, but I will make it short. So as you mentioned, I'm a PR strategist and consultant. I currently work with entrepreneurs to help them develop and put together personalized communication strategies using a self-knowledge system called human design, as well as a related body of work called the gene keys. And so I've worked in PR for 2 decades. I started my career in pharmaceutical product communications right out of college. I worked directly for 3 of the biggest global pharmaceutical companies. And I moved up the ladder really quickly and I had a lot of success, but I just never really felt fulfilled by the work. I wasn't energized with it. I think that's like a very common story that we hear a lot these days, more and more, especially people my age. When you get to that like middle life point, you start to say like, what am I doing? But for me, it really happened the year I turned 30. I was feeling just more and more frustrated and stuck. And I had a very tragic experience where I lost a friend very suddenly in a car accident, which really made me kind of wake up and say, what am I doing? I need a change. And so I made a big move into consulting in 2006. And so I went to work for a network agency. They were people I'd worked with before, actually as their client, and I just loved them personally and professionally. And so I went there. I enjoyed that for more than a decade, had tons of freedom. It actually ended up being even more lucrative to my surprise. And, like just even though I was working behind the scenes, it was just nice because it had a different pace. And then in 2016, it kind of shifted again, and I took on this really huge account that just burnt me out over 5 years. And as the universe would have it, right as I was really kind of hitting my breaking point, the client was acquired and the project went away like literally almost overnight. And so instead of taking on a new assignment within the agency, I made a really big decision to take a break from work. And it took about 9 months just to literally take time for myself, which was such a gift. And so I did a lot of soul searching about like what I wanted to do with my career from there. And as I was like really diving deep into the spiritual and self-development space, I started meeting all these amazing people. And so many of them were entrepreneurs that weren't happy with the way they had to promote their business, but they just felt unsure of how to get out there with PR as another option. And I knew that they thought they weren't worthy of it or whatever, all things we know are not true. And so I'd been really deeply studying human design and the gene keys at that point. And I just literally had this idea at one point that I could combine the two things together to help people uncover really their authenticity and like find their authentic message and share it in a way that felt good for them and not do it everybody else's way. And so now I take on a limited number of done for you PR clients. It's like really small. I actually only have one at the moment because I like to really offer consulting support for solo entrepreneurs so they can, really take it and DIY it. And then I do group courses that also take my students on this really beautiful self-exploration journey to uncover their messaging and then develop strategies with human design. And so they can also take that to publicists, copywriters, web design, they can use it in all different ways and they don't feel like they're starting from a blank page or pulling it out of thin air. It actually feels like something they can own confidently. And I also think that's a bonus for publicists too. I mean, if somebody came to me with something that captured their essence in a really clear way, I think that's also really helps the publicist or whoever else you might be working with do a great job. And so I like to say that I'm offering more than just PR because I see it as this really cool combination of communication support infused with this deep level of self-knowledge and awareness as well. So I'm really enjoying it. I love it.
Okay. So for those of you, some of you are vibing, you're understanding, you're like, this is so cool. And some of you are like, about a what? Huh? Human design, gene keys. So let's take a step back because for all of this story to really come full circle, let's tell everyone high level, again, not the PhD version, what is human design and what are the gene keys?
Yeah. So it's perfect transition. So in short, human design is called the science of differentiation. So it shows us how we're each individually designed to interact with the world around us. So, that helps us live to our highest potential and shows us how we can achieve success and fulfillment, which is different for everybody, even though the world may like to tell us it looks a certain way. But it helps us do that with less resistance and struggle because we're doing it aligned with our true energy. So it's giving us permission to be our most authentic selves instead of who we think we should be. And it also shows us where we might be living from our conditioning or like according to other people's expectations. And for me, it showed me so many things that I really judged about myself were exactly who I'm meant to be and what makes me the most aligned and able to pursue my version of success. So for lack of a better comparison, you could think of it like a behavioral or personality profiling test, maybe Enneagram or Myers-Briggs, except it's based on our birth date, time, and location. And it actually combines several different systems in ancient wisdom. So a few of them are astrology, the Chinese I Ching, the chakra system, which a lot of people are familiar with. And it shows us how we're imprinted by these little teeny tiny particles of matter that are present at the time of our birth. And that's based on the position of the planets and the collective energy that exist at that moment. And there's actually a scientific facility in Japan that studies these particles, which are called neutrinos. And when you look at certain pieces of it, it's the gates or the keys in the gene keys, the gates in human design. They actually have been scientific studies that show that the 64 gates or keys actually align with the 64 codons of our DNA. And Carl Jung started this research. So there's a lot of scientific backing, even though people may see it as sort of woo. But I could go into a lot more detail. I won't, but it's just so much more objective because we're not answering questions to get our results. And, when you take those tests and those questions, you answer from our minds, which is affected by our conditioning. We may answer questions differently depending on our mood or the day or what we hope to see subconsciously. And so human design and the gene keys, which are related, eliminate that gap between who we think we are and who we really are. And then I'll just say one more thing, which is that, once we know and start to understand our design, and there's some really simple ways to even start with it. You don't have to get into the minute details, although a lot of people do once they start to feel how resonant it is, for them. But we have a choice of how to experiment with it. You sort of take the information and it's like a choose your own adventure story. There's high and low expressions of the energy. You could be living in your shadow or you could be living out the gift. Just depends. You start to become self-aware and see where you are, but it literally can affect every part of our lives, from our mental well-being, which I also believe has a lot to do with our physical well-being. And how we make decisions, how we navigate relationships, find fulfillment, and then to bring it back to communications, how we can find our authentic message and bring it forward with PR. And so, I use human design to explore how a person is meant to communicate, so the energetics of it, and then the gene keys give us the storyline. So it's sort of like putting those two things together.
And guys, so holy moly, ravioli. So cool. But here's what we're gonna do. So, and Amanda reached out to Kaylee, our producer, and she asked if I'd be open to providing her with my birth date, where I was born and the time of birth, which, fun fact, I had to text my mom. She had to go find my baby book because neither of us knew when I was born, but turns out I was born at 11:30 a.m. in Portland, Oregon. And what we're going to do is we're going to take, or what Amanda's going to do is just give you a little sampling of how everything she just shared does transition into a comm strategy. And when her and I first met, she started walking me through this. And this is where I really start to get goosebumps, because no matter where you fall on I call it the woo scale, whether you're like team woo or you're like, right? This becomes really, really smart, intuitive, and practical. So I'm actually going to do something I've never done on the show. And I'm going to sit back and let you take the driver's seat here and walk us through what this looks like.
Sure. And so I'll talk a little high level first, and then we'll talk specifically about you, because I think starting a little bit more broadly might give some of your listeners also an opportunity to go and explore for themselves versus hearing the super specifics. But it's funny, I was just listening to the episode that you did with, I think it was it Candace D'Angelo?
Yeah.
And she made a statement that really rung true for me. And it always has rung true, which is that, especially when you're a solo entrepreneur and you own your own business, the hardest thing to do is talk about yourself, because we don't know what to say, or we feel like we're making it up, or we don't feel like we can own it confidently. And so having something like this as a foundation can really help people figure out how to do that without feeling like they're literally just plucking information, and then not feeling like they can own it and share it. Because we all know that the frequency of how we communicate something is just as important as how we say it. Like if I didn't believe in this and I was sharing it with you, you would hear that coming through from me. But I've just seen it work, and so many people resonate with it that it's, like if you said to me, read somebody's astrology chart, I might be like, well, this says this, but I'm like, I could look at it and be like, okay, Lexie, your type is a generator. So I know that most likely you're going to want to be in response to things like that. And I'm a generator as well. So like, there's things that you just start to know, and you just see it bring so true for people that I see myself doing it sometimes, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you shouldn't be telling that person that, you can see that potential in them. I shouldn't say, because it never tells us who to be. It gives us the potentials that we all have. But, so there's a lot of nuanced places you can look in the chart. If anyone's ever run their human design chart, I'm sure they've seen it's this like very complicated little map of like kind of a human body and shapes and colors and numbers and symbols and all of these things. But to keep it simple, there's really two places that you could look very easily, just to give people some highlights for how it works. So everybody has a type in human design, and there's 5 types. And so when we look at those 5 different types, there's the manifestor, the generator, the manifesting generator, the projector, and the reflector. You are a generator, Lexie. You can see in terms of like, so we're talking about the energetics of communications now, like how people are here to present themselves. You can see that some people are literally here to start the trends. There are people like manifestors. They tended to be in history, the kings and the queens, or the leaders. But, these days there's a new paradigm of leadership, and these people are literally meant to bring ideas and initiate things so that the rest, well, I shouldn't say the rest of us, but the 70% of us that are the generators and the manifesting generator readers, we're sort of here to build things in response to those, big, bold ideas that we can they bring us along. So it's not like, you're our subjects and the slaves, which is what it might have been.
Like, I want to be a queen.
I know. Well, I'll tell you, there's challenges. There are difficulties and gifts to each type. And the more I study this, the more I see. I personally like being a generator now that I know so much more about it, because we really have the energy to build and master things and to bring them to other people. But we also get to love the work that we do too. So I'm getting a little bit off on a tangent, but there's like some wonderful things when you find, which I think you have found the work that you love. I know that I have now. And I've also seen why I had to sort of do what I did to get to this point. Like I had to go through sort of this like, experience of PR to find this new iteration of PR for myself. And I see that very clearly in my chart now that I look at it. But based on the type, you kind of can understand, even as a generator, you might, like I know for me, for example, I love to listen to podcasts because it doesn't mean I'm taking the ideas from the podcast, but what it does is it sparks something for me to respond to. And often when I'm listening or I'm reading, that's where I sort of get that inspiration that then I can take and run with it. So sometimes it's even, you may be looking at something for your client or listening to something and you're like, well, this isn't exactly related, but I know that they'll either really strongly agree and have a new perspective on it, or they might totally disagree and be able to share something that might really open up people's thinking into a new direction. And so being in response as a generator is something that's really important. And we'll talk a little more specifically about you in that light. But then there's people that are like projectors. They're literally here to be these wise guides. And so they are, oftentimes don't feel that way. And so when you tell them that, you're here to guide people, you're here to be seen, but you also have to wait and make sure you're seen by the right people. So projectors have to be very careful about when they reach out to media. They can't just say, hey, Lexie, I want to come on your podcast. Like I really have something to share. They have to just have nuanced language to create space for an invitation. And so I think Emily is a projector, I believe, right? Emily Merrill? Oh, you don't even know. I think she is. I feel like Jess Bobico has told me that, shared that with me before. I was in a group with Emily once with Jess, so maybe I even know it from
That's
that.
who introduced me to the concept of the Gene Keys. I have a book.
Yeah. So for Emily, she can, she's here to guide people and be very wise, but she needs to also make sure that before she's reaching out or doing something that it's really in alignment for her and that she is doing it in a little bit of a softer way. So teaching people that as if you have a DIY PR client, teaching them how to nuance their language so that they're being seen, they're, showing their mastery, but they're not being forceful about it can be really powerful. For like you and me, when we send an email to a reporter, referencing something that we read or heard from them is actually energetically going to get their attention. Because, I read your last article. I really loved it. It made me think X, Y, or Z. So it's just, there's nuances like that for all of the types, and everybody falls into one of the five. And I teach this to my clients and my students, and it gives them tools to use when they reach out. And so another big place we can look before we dive in real specifically to you is everyone is two numbers separated by a slash, and we call that our profile. And so, I view that as sort of the persona that we're meant to bring out into the world. And it also sort of wraps in our method of communicating or teaching other people or sharing with other people. And so, there's 6 of these, but to give you a sampling of a few, if you're a line 1, these individuals love to dive really deep and learn as much as they possibly can. So I'm not a line 1, but I have a lot of line 1s in my profile. So we can even look at that because there's other pieces, it might be beneath the surface too, when you dive into the chart more deeply, but they're supposed to position themselves as subject matter experts or authorities on a topic. And it makes people feel safe in their knowledge. Ironically, these people are also usually the ones that think they don't know enough or that what they want to share, everybody knows, and it's not the case. And so, if you have a client that would have a line 1 in their profile and they're really shy to present themselves as an expert, you really are going to put them out there as an expert, to share with media, and you can know that about them. Some people, like line 3s, this is kind of an interesting one. They're here to live through experience and trial and error so they can share those experiences with other people to learn from. And I say this with air quotes, mistakes, right? And that's really hard for people to do. I mean, you tell somebody this and say, I'll say to even friends like, or, that I know that are trying to get ahead at work or whatever. And I say, oh, you should totally walk into the meeting and talk about the projects that you manage that you learned from, but that didn't have the outcome that you would hope for. And they look at me like I have 4 heads, but that is the most valuable information that they can provide. So there's just things, there are 2 good examples because I feel like they're places that people would never proactively want to share out into the world. But when you can see that, it actually will feel more comfortable to them once they sort of have that permission slip. And they, when they do it, they will get a lot more engagement because that is energetically the way that they're meant to teach people or to share information about what it is that they're doing. So that could be social media, their website, PR, any type of, I look at it from a very broad communications perspective, because I believe this applies to any of those things.
Did you know that I send out a community newsletter roundup every Tuesday, chock full of resources, free media kit downloads, event invites, journalist contacts, visibility opportunities. Basically, if you're not on the list, hit pause and sign up. It's super simple. Go to theprbarinc.com/newsworthy. That link is in the show notes. Okay, back to the show. One question, because I can imagine, so you've painted already from an entrepreneurial perspective why this would be so incredible, but I also am thinking of my publicist listeners who are like, wait, I want to know this about my client. Do you have, just quick question, a service where a publicist can work with you to learn either?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
Because
you could do that. And so I haven't actually done that specifically, but what I have had people do is, I create the strategy. The messaging you we could talk a little bit more about that later. It's really the messaging you really should do yourself, because it has to have that true meaning. And it's a little bit of a personal development deep dive to do that. But yes, from a PR perspective, if you had a client that was really struggling and you came to me and gave me their chart, I would be able to give you a very clear outline, and we could go as deep or as broad as you want, but I could give you a broad strategy of how they would take that information. You can even, there's even ways you look at something we call motivation, which is the driving force beneath your work. And when you start to look at that, it even then gives you these extra layers of places to look. And to me, it really helps create content, because I think sometimes, it's again, are we presenting ourselves as we are, or as we think people want to see us to buy? And I personally feel like we're going to attract the wrong people if we're not doing it in alignment. And that's just as bad as attracting no people in so many ways. So, but yes, and that's what I also see value here, because I think that it's something, even if people don't want to do their own PR, giving that to a publicist, it's handing that publicist, I think for me, if I were on the other side of it, a really valuable tool to work from.
Well, that's where I was like, I want this on all my clients. So I planted the seed there for everyone. Now, okay, I'm your client. I walk into your world. How do we go about this? So you have my information. I'm a generator, I guess. What else do you know about me, and what can I do?
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about you. Well, I'll give you some of the highlights too, that may not even be like work or communication, just for fun too, to pepper it in. So you are an emotional generator. And what that means is 50% of the population have emotional authority. And all that means is that you have consistent energy from an emotional perspective. And it also means that you are not designed to make quick decisions. So I don't know if you feel that, or if that resonates.
I feel that I have a lot of emotions.
Yes,
for sure. Like, I'm a high anxiety person.
So do you have, so I guess what I would say is this, like when you're faced with a bigger decision, so you do have a sacral, so you can make some pretty quick yes and no decisions if they're easy. But if you have a bigger decision, do you feel sometimes it takes you a longer time to feel neutral about that?
To feel, okay, that's an interesting way you phrase that.
So I'll rephrase that.
Neutral, to eliminate the emotions.
Yes.
It takes me longer. I can make quick decisions. But to not have emotion attached, I have a literal, look at this.
Oh my God, that's so funny. I have one that says, let it be fun. So that's, I have sticky stuck to my monitor too.
For those of you not on YouTube, I just held up my Get Neutral. I have a Get Neutral sticky note on my desk.
See, you're so aligned. So you know that. So, right. So decisions for clients, you probably can make pretty quickly because they're not for you. And you have a defined ajna, which I also do. It means our minds can be very busy, which can create a lot of anxiety, like you said. But what we have to learn is that, and this is sort of more for you than for work or comms, but your mind is here for other people. And so you have to remember that you're never going to outthink your problems or think your way to solutions for yourself. So when you can be neutral in your big decisions for yourself, and it's never going to be 100%, but when you start to not have those ups and downs, and your particular wave, I think, moves pretty quickly, like you might kind of bump up and down a lot. It's energy in your body. It's a mechanical 100%. Reaction that like your body is biologically experiencing. So anyway, so that's a bit, I feel like I should share that because it's an important thing to know. So if someone says to you, Lexie, will you just make a decision, or you don't feel certain, it is 100% fine and actually recommended that you take your time and do not make quick decisions when you don't feel neutral.
Fascinating.
So I love that you had that. Talk about, there we go.
No kidding.
A little synchronicity. So like I said, you're here to be in response. And so even for you, I mean, things like, I mean, not to mean you can't go out and pitch, but things like Harrow and Quoted, you may actually, as a generator, see more success with those than other people because you're literally responding, and you probably are responding appropriately. So you're giving them the information that they want because it's not just spaghetti. You're in response to what they are looking for. And so that's like a great thing. And 70% of the population is either a generator or a manifesting generator, which is great. I actually find a lot of success with Harrow from that particular perspective. But even like I said, like listening to a podcast episode, sometimes it just gives me an idea for a pitch because not because we're copying, but it sparks something. Like those ideas are not always going to be coming from within us. And so the other thing for you, when you're putting yourself out there, and I feel like you do this very well, I actually was like, Lexie is so aligned when I looked through your chart, but it's also showing how much you love your work. And I feel like that really comes through for me, which is why I enjoy your podcast so much. You make it fun. You bring joy to it. It seems to light you up. And as generators, that's probably one of the most important things that we're here to do, is to master something that we love and then build something from there.
Oh, you're making me all sorts of emotional. Okay.
You have any questions? So yeah,
I do. Well, interesting. Tell me if I'm understanding this. When I'm in my zone, when I come up with my best ideas, it's after having done a ton of research or after having read something. So I do think that is kind of in response. So even beyond Harrow or Quoted, if we bring this back to pitching,
yes,
I generally need to really, really deep dive and research a given journalist before I come up with what I think the best angle is.
Yeah.
That's where my ideas come from. So if I'm understanding correctly, that resonates.
Yes, 100%, because you're in response to something that external of you, right? So however you get it, whether it's that inquiry that you're responding to that's in Harrow or Quoted, or it's your research and you're being very selective because it probably feels energetically correct for you to reach out to someone when you know that they're more likely to be interested, or they've done something in some way that has given you that little ping that they're the right target.
And I also resonate. And for those of you listening, if this is you too, when I am not excited about something, this is also transferable into sales. If I'm not excited about an offer anymore, or if I really feel like I'm forcing something, I generally don't see success with it because energetically it's not coming off the same. So I definitely can pinpoint different moments in my career. And I even look at my business today and I have sunsetted certain offers because I'm like, I'm just not excited anymore about it.
Yeah. And you don't feel like you have the energy for them. I know and I even think about my career. I always loved PR, but I just didn't have the energy for it. It made me feel really tired. So what I also say to generators, just having practiced this for a few years, even if it's something you have to do or you want to do, if you follow your energy, you will do things so much more quickly too. So if I force something, if I was like, oh, I have to write such and such, if I try to force it, I'll end up redoing it, where instead of worrying about crossing it off my list, I let it go until it's ready to come out of me, and then it comes out of me. So it's like just also following your energy and what lights you up is really, really important for you.
So literally, I want to hold you hostage selfishly for 3 hours. But if people want to start to go through this process themselves, where's the best first step? Let's also tell them where they can connect with you. Are you the first step? Do you suggest rather, is there like
Sure. Well, it depends. It depends on their objective, because there's so many more things. Like you have so many, it's funny, even I'll tell you one more thing before I get to that too. You have a channel, which sometimes is called the Freak to Genius channel. I have this as well. And what that says about your communication is it's really important to wait for timing, because otherwise your audience might think that you've lost it. So like if you would have had me on this show a year ago, people might have been like, what is Lexie doing? She's gone off the deep end. But it's also, again, like knowing what to share and when. So you have a lot of really interesting things in your chart, and I'm happy to share more offline too, that are really aligned for PR. You also, like, your strongest energy is patience, and my PR is a marathon, not a sprint. And so there's just a lot, and the gate of you have like a lot of it's compassion, but it's also about being calm in crisis. You have so many interesting things in your chart that, again, like you can bring out in messaging because they are super aligned to you. But it's also just fun to see how people end up in careers when they follow their joy. Yeah. But what I'll say, sorry, go ahead.
Here and laughing because I agree with those sentiments related to career, but then you bring the word patience back to my household and you ask my husband if he thinks that would resonate. I don't know if he'd agree with you.
Well, I'll tell you, it's interesting because that's your core talent. And your core talent is also your core wound. So it's the thing you have to learn the most in your own life that then you take out to share with the world.
Oh, guys, this is okay. Can you see why I had to have Amanda on the show? I just find this, I mean, I have so many questions. My brain's going a million. It's like a beautiful mind up in there right now.
That's a defined ajna. I can see it.
All the things. If people are like me right now, give them direction of where to go. Tell us where to go first to get started.
So I would say this, if you want to know about it for personal reasons, she's actually my client too, but Emma Dunwoody is amazing. She has the Human Design podcast. You could go and run your chart on her site. You'll get emails from her that will be specific to you. That is, to me, a great place to start. She's a membership too. Not that I'm here selling for Emma, but that's honestly what hooked me on this. I found Emma's podcast, 2 or 3 years ago, and it's a really simple way that doesn't cost you anything right off the bat to sort of find your main aspects of the chart and then learn more about them. And if you just even stick with the big ones, which are type and strategy, which comes with your type, that's the response, and then authority, which for you is emotional, you could literally change your whole life just doing those few things. If you want to learn about it from a PR perspective and how to use it in PR, you can go to my website, which is curateyoursoul.com. You can run your chart. You will get a little freebie that's an energetic PR starter guide, or intuitive PR starter guide, I think I call it, which will give you some information on how to apply you'll be able to see your type on your chart and then understand how to apply it. And then from there, I have many different offerings. I'm currently in the middle of a messaging course right now, which is actually takes it's called your incarnation cross in human design and your genius sequence in the gene keys. They're the same placements. And I work with people to build their business manifesto. So finding messaging around their mission, their vision, their values, and their hero's journey story, which literally is represented right in your chart, that you can kind of find the challenges that you've worked through and what you're meant to share with other people. So I'm running one of those now, but I have a wait list for the next one when that gets started up again. But yeah, and on Instagram at curate.your.soul didn't want to come out, where I share a lot of free tips too. So you can kind of find a lot of that basic information there too to get started if you want to play around with it. But I'm hoping to start doing some master classes and things like that too. I've been working in the human design community, obviously, with a lot of people, but now, I appreciate you having me on to start to bring this out a little more broadly, because I think a lot of people could really benefit from it. So I'm excited to share it.
And as someone who also is in a coaching and a done for you space, it's such a pain point. People, especially with PR, fighting themselves. So the need is there. We'll drop all the links in the show notes, guys. So don't worry about having written them down. Okay, my final question for you today is when you're in your freak to genius mode, what can we find you sipping? Basically, that's what I'm trying to get at. What is your favorite beverage? We're on this show, so non-alcoholic or alcoholic.
I love it. Well, so I'm a big Diet Coke. Sorry for people.
Okay.
I know it's not good for you, and coffee fan, but from an alcohol perspective, I am a big fan of the dirty martini.
The dirty martini. We've had a lot of dirty martini girls on this show, and I'm wondering, there must just be something publicists in the world of journalism that calls to it. I don't know. Maybe there's
stress. We need the strongest drink possible.
Can our chart, is that in our chart? Is that like you guys?
Probably somewhere. Well, it's funny. And I'll tell you, like, the more I actually live with my chart, the less I need the alcohol, because the less stress I have. So it's beautiful from that perspective too. It's calmed me down a whole hell of a lot. Cause most of us publicists are pretty type A people. So
yeah. Yep. Definitely have been called that a few times in my life. So I get it. Well, thank you so much for giving us even just a little bit of your genius today. I am beyond amazed and intrigued into this world. And I hope everyone listening was also mind blown. We've given you the links of where to follow the rabbit hole next if you want to dive into this a bit more. But really, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on the show today, Amanda.
Thank you for having me. It was a joy.
Hey guys, if you are enjoying the Pitchin and Sippin podcast, please do me a huge favor and leave a review wherever you are listening. If you want to connect with me to learn more about the PR Bar Inc., you can do so on Instagram at @thePRBar_Inc., or you can check out my website at theprbarinc.com. Cheers!